Last time we were together for Mercy Night, we began to discuss the possibility and maybe start to sketch the ideas of a Eucharistic culture. It began with embracing the idea of what is a culture as opposed to a society, meaning, namely, the distinction that John Paul II made between culture, which is the best that human beings have to offer, and society, which is just the culmination of everything that is human, the good and the bad. Cultures are passed on, they're taught, they are the air that we breathe, they are what makes, it's kind of like the human behavior equivalent of a dialect. I'd like this evening to explore one of the elements of Catholic Eucharistic culture. If you've been reading the book that we have, that we gave out for Advent, one of the big sections that he begins with is to talk about sort of the foundation of Catholic Eucharistic culture has to do with what he calls reverence. And I'm not going to lie, when I read that, I went, oh God, here we go. Because that is a word that is so overused in liturgical circles that it almost has no meaning at all. What does reverence mean? It means it's beautiful. I don't think that's what that means. It means it's ornate. I definitely don't think that's what that means. It means it's quiet. That might be closer to the thing. It means it's done properly. I guarantee you, as we move through the course of the evening, you will see how that is an awful definition of reverence, and in fact is the source and seedbed of much of our discussion, much of the debate between the two camps in the major liturgy wars. If you don't know what that means, good for you. Stay that way. But the author goes on to say, reverence is. It is essentially, reverence is when an act of piety is grounded in reality. I like to bring up two images. If you've ever seen these two very classic movies, if you haven't seen them, they're probably worth a watch. One I have watched multiple times, one I've only ever seen bits and pieces of. The first is The Fiddler on the Roof. It's a long one, right? I've only seen bits and pieces of it. What I love about The Fiddler on the Roof is that there are these rather long, in theater terms, soliloquies. The main character is talking to himself. But in each of those moments, he's actually praying. He's talking to God. And what the film director did is, behind the scenes, they created a special effect. It's actually really ingenious. In order to create this idea that the person is speaking to something sort of otherworldly, they back the camera away like a lot. Instead of the camera being right on the person, they'd be 10, 15 feet back. And behind the scenes, there was a guy with a tennis ball holding it up so that the actor would have a focal point to look at as they spoke to God. The thing I love about that scene is that it exudes, it intimates that this person really believes that there is a God listening to their prayers. The problem often in Christianity is not whether or not there is a God. It is Christians who are more than willing to live with a foot in both worlds. I believe that there is a God, but he has no impact on my life. I believe there is a God because it makes me feel good, but I'm not going to change my life around this God that I believe in. You feel the dichotomy? But in this movie, you see these men, the people that are in these praying situations, really do believe that there is a God, that they can speak to them, and that speaking to this God really helps. The second image is from the musical Les Miserables. Now, of course, you kind of have to rely on the movie because the nature of musicals is that every enactment of the musical is slightly different than everyone before it and everyone after it. So, if you will indulge me, I'm really not referring to the musical, I'm referring to the most recent movie. And of course, the beginning of the movie is about this man, Jean Valjean, who is arrested for the heinous crime of stealing a loaf of bread to feed a starving child. And the movie, the story is very much a discussion of the ill effects of corrupt power on good and honest people. Jean Valjean is a good man, but through great suffering, just amazingly unjust prison sentence, and then a relatively corrupt society around him, decides that he is no longer going to be an honest man and that he's going to do what it takes to survive, and would probably have become a rather evil man, except that he chose to steal from a bishop. Now, if I must say so, this bishop, I know it's a literary figure and not a real person, has a tremendous amount of generosity that might still be rather rare amongst our actual bishops. No shade to those men who carry that duty. I don't see many of them opening their houses to a scruffy vagabond, right? Most of us wouldn't do that for fear of our own safety. And of course, in the middle of the night, what is expected to happen happens. Jean Valjean gets up in the middle of the night and steals all of the silver and tries to make off with it so that he can start his life anew. But he's dragged back, accused of the theft. And then the good bishop looks at him and says, "I gave this as a gift, but you left the best behind," and gives him 2 candlesticks and dismisses the guards that had dragged him back. And when the guards have left, the bishop says to Jean Valjean, "You must take this precious silver and become an honest man." And he does. Over the course of the whole movie, the whole musical, it is about his reconversion back to an honest way of living and healing from the great wound that the trauma of his imprisonment has created. If you pay very close attention, Jean Valjean has to flee the town that he has become mayor of because Javert, the great nemesis of the whole movie, of the whole story, has found him. And he flees to Paris, where he can hide more effectively. And you can tell that some time has elapsed because the little girl he's adopted is suddenly 16 instead of 4. Okay? And you see this precious scene where he's kneeling, and you got to pay really close attention because this is breezed over very easily in the movie. But he's kneeling in front of the cross and the 2 candlesticks that he got from the bishop. And this thief, this broken man, has now become a man of prayer. And it's made all the difference. That's the significant difference between the man he was in prison, the man he was when he initially got out of prison, and then finally the man he becomes throughout the rest of the course of the musical. This is a man to whom his piety and action is based in his reality. And so, the second half of the book that we're reading focuses on a piety or an expression of Eucharistic devotion that is very much based in reality. That what you do when you kneel down to pray has to be based in what you expect to be real. A lot of what is wrong with our Eucharistic devotion and current practice of Eucharistic society, if I'd be so bold as to make that stretch, is not that we don't believe, but that our believing is not enacted in practice. And what I mean by believe, that this is thinking with assent. That's John Henry Newman's famous definition of belief. I assent to the thing that I think. I think I might even know that the Eucharist really is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. But true Eucharistic culture is about living as if that is true. Now, of course, even saying it that way is a bit deceptive. It's not really living as if this is true, as if what is in this tabernacle is not really what we say it is, but only that we are pretending that it is what we say it is. No. What I mean by that is that I live as if this were the truth, even though it does not appear to be what we believe it is. I live telling my senses that they are not revealing the full truth. I live as if it is true, as opposed to living with a certain secular ideal that this is all really made up and make-believe, just to make me feel good and to make me feel better, or maybe even to cow me in submission to a certain way of acting so that I might be easier to, or less, more or less easy to control by other authorities. If this is not real, it is worthless. If this isn't real, it's worthless. Imagine how different our lives would be. I know I say that quite often. But what if, instead of saying, I believe this is real, I say this is real. It's not that we believe that the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ, but the Eucharist is the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ. It is real. It's grounded in reality. And I live in the reality that I'm grounded in. Let go of what you think you look like. I have often given this advice in confession. Sometimes the only way to deal with your anger is to drive out into the swamp and yell at the trees. And you've got to ignore the way you look. Because you will look just a little bit psychotic. Just a little bit. But, I often say this in confession too. Would you rather look sane or be sane? Would you rather look calm and collected and together or be healed? That doesn't have to be the dichotomy. But if you're going to ignore the things that lead to good health for the sake of appearance, that is the decision you're making. Do you want to pray in a way that saves your soul? Do you want to pray in a way that gets you to heaven? Or do you want to pray in a way that makes you appear like a good and together Christian? Because we have a great model in sacred scripture for that way of acting. The Pharisees did everything that they did in order to be seen, so says Jesus Christ. That's a dead road. It doesn't lead anywhere. When you pray, don't say if. Instead, have a certain boldness that you have a God who loves you like a father in heaven. And more importantly, if this is more or less your problem, God does not like you or love you like your father. He is better. If your dad was a good dad, awesome, great. Not everybody's was. If your dad was a bad dad, you got to let that go. That is not the way the Lord is. You only have a Father in heaven, and He loves you very, very, very deeply. Our Eucharistic piety has to be based in something of reality. When you go into the Eucharist, are you prepared? Or is this just a thing that you do? Now, I don't say that as if I am somehow immune to this. No. In fact, I'm probably worse at this than you are. Because it is easy for me to simply find myself accidentally in the presence of the Lord in the Eucharist. Whether it's in here, in our adoration chapel, in the rectory, in any of our other churches. It is easy, especially on Sunday, to just walk into Mass and just kind of go on autopilot. especially by, say, 11 o'clock Mass, where I've done this. This is the 4th time this weekend. That's no complaint. Just, I want you to know, I know this is hard. And it doesn't necessarily get any easier with a ton of practice, especially since it's so easy to mess up. Are you prepared? Do you listen to the prayers as if, like this is the TV on in the background while you go about your life? Or do you make the prayers your prayer? Pay attention the next time you're at the Mass. A lot of those prayers, some of them are prayers of praise. We're turning to the Lord and saying, God, this is what you've done for us. We love you. But some of them, many of them, are prayers of petition. Lord, you called the people out of exile to bring them back to you. Keep us together. Lord, you sent your Son. You paid the price for us. Don't let any of us, bought with the precious blood of your Son, be lost. Do you have time for silence? There is expected some amount of time in the Eucharistic liturgy in which there will be time for silence and contemplation. Do you just sit there and kind of shuffle nervously? It's okay. But sit there and enjoy the silence. It's only in the silence that we really have a shot at hearing the Lord in the quietest parts of our heart. Everything else can be easy to run away. This is not to say that God doesn't speak through signs and symbols and music, and certainly through sacred scripture. But that when you introduce something else, that becomes a place where you can hide. But silence is the desert. There is nothing in the desert but God. There is nothing in the silence but the Lord, the devil, and your own quiet thoughts. The Catechism calls prayer a battle. And if you're fighting a battle, you might ask, who are you fighting? Because you're not wrestling with the Lord as Israel, Jacob did all those many years ago. Maybe you are. But let's be honest, for most of us, the enemy is me. I am distracted. I am undisciplined. The enemy may also be the devil. Not every distraction comes from you. Many of them do, but not all of them. It may be the world, your day, the chaos of life. But there is a battle. And in the silence is where that battle is fought. If our Eucharistic culture, if our Eucharistic piety is to be at any way salvific, it must be based in reality. Now, I strongly believe this. Most of what is wrong with our contemporary Christianity is that we live it as if it were merely culture. The way in which there are certain myths that people will deeply dive into. There are a few of them I'm going to refrain from saying because there might be children watching, and I don't want to be the bearer of bad news for those particular things. But let's be honest. I like the way Bishop Barron every once in a while reminds us that Superman is a myth. The myth of Superman. Now, the difference between the myth of Superman and the myth of Zeus is that we all know it's nonsense. We all know it's make-believe. And there is no historical foundation in the cult of Superman. But that don't stop people from dressing up like Superman and going to the conventions. Superman is probably not the best example for that, but I guarantee you if I walk around here, I can ask you questions that 150 years ago would have been absolute nonsense. And you all could give me not only answers, but well thought out answers. Are you a Jedi or a Sith? Which house do you belong to? Gryffindor? Slytherin? Hufflepuff? Ravenclaw? Whose side are you on? Jacob? Or whoever the werewolf is. I don't know. I don't actually watch Twilight. That was a thing, right? These things are total make-believe. They are total figments of our imagination, total works of literature. And yet, in those myths, you can find yourself. Okay. This is not the way religion is. At least not Catholicism. We have an incarnate religion. This didn't happen a long time ago in a galaxy far away, nor in a faraway place, nor once upon a time. But instead, if you read the Gospels, when Tiberius Caesar was emperor, when Herod was king, when, I don't know the story well enough to say who else was the governor of Israel, but you read the beginnings of the Gospels, and it gives you dates. There is nothing in the cult of Hercules that provides dates or times or people. Jesus of Nazareth walked this earth. Peter, Paul, Andrew, James, John, Thomas, Bartholomew, Matthew, Simon, Jude, all of those men, with the exception of John, went to their deaths, proclaiming the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the overthrowing of the powers of the world. The blood of the martyrs is the seedbed of the church. Our faith is grounded not in myth, but in reality. There may be myths and stories, but they are true and based on what actually happened. Was the universe actually spun into existence in 6 24-hour periods? Not all that relevant. What is far more relevant, even to today, is that this universe, this cosmos that we inhabit, was created intentionally by a being of vast intelligence. Not an accident. Not a mere explosion. Now, the Lord may have used an explosion. The same way that one might throw water balloons full of paint at a wall and create art, or some semblance of art, right? Except this is the Lord. He can use explosions to create cathedrals. I don't know how to do that, but also I'm not creating the cosmos, and certainly not from nothing. But it was created from nothing for a reason. This is a long way to go to say there is a God out there. This religion is based in reality. And before you dismiss it, you should go out and encounter the living God. Not presume that he's not speaking to you. Not start by presuming that he doesn't exist and wait for it to be proven wrong. But instead, allow the Lord to reveal himself to you. Because this has to be based in reality. Now, of course, for the rest of the evening, we will move into Eucharistic adoration. Because we believe that this is God. What is in the tabernacle that I will expose is God. Body, blood, soul, and divinity. More powerful than any other nuclear force on the planet. Stronger than any other power ever known to human history is the Eucharist. God, our Lord, is really in there. And he wants to speak to you tonight.